that's really alarming. And I don't think a pollution can be more serious than this, given the kind of potential impact of that.
Every day of delay that we have with any action on PFAS is more PFAS that are impacting the ocean and wider environment as well.
Hello and welcome to the Ocean News Podcast, an audio series in which we take a deeper dive into the most important stories and biggest headlines from the oceanographic newsroom. I'm Eva Cahill, the Editorial Assistant here at Oceanographic. And in today's episode, we're looking at forever chemicals, how regulation has already made a real difference to PFAS levels in marine life, and whether the UK's new PFAS action plan, released this week, will be enough to limit their impact here at home. Per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, also known as PFAS or forever chemicals, are found everywhere in modern life, from furniture and cosmetics to food packaging, non-stick pans and clothing. PFAS chemicals were first discovered in the 1930s, but World War II supercharged their use as the military leaned on these miracle chemicals for everything from aircraft performance to firefighting foams, setting the stage for their spread into everyday life. Industry manufacturers first discovered how harmful PFAS chemicals were in the 1960s and 70s, and the harm PFAS chemicals have caused since has been well documented. From disrupting seabirds' energy production and reproductive success to weakening immunity in sea otters, and being associated with serious health implications, like liver and kidney disease in humans. Public awareness and regulatory action did not happen until the late 1990s and early 2000s, driven by legal action and an EPA investigation of DuPont's 1998 laboratory studies. Finally, international regulations and industry shifts meant that PFAS chemicals began to be phased out in the early 2000s, and a new Harvard study has shown just how effective these regulations were in reducing the level of PFAS chemicals found in our marine life. The study, conducted by Harvard, found that the levels of forever chemicals in North Atlantic pilot whales have declined more than 60% due to greater regulations. Researchers analysed whale tissue samples from 1986 to 2023 and used organofluorine as a proxy for overall PFAS contamination because it includes both legacy and newer PFAS compounds and chemicals. While legacy PFAS chemicals are declining, new forever chemicals appear to be taking their place. Senior author Elsie Sunderland, Professor of Environmental Chemistry, has likened the PFAS problem to a whack-a-mole. Once researchers understand the exposure and implications of one chemical, a new one is developed. And these new PFAS chemicals are not behaving how the old ones did, with greater concentrations found on land. While this may be good news for marine life, it also means that we don't fully understand how these new PFAS chemicals work and how they'll impact our environment. Sunderland added, this underscores the need to place stronger regulations on ongoing PFAS production to mitigate future impacts. In recent years, the EU has made moves to further restrict PFAS production and use, and this month the UK government set out an action plan to combat PFAS pollution in the UK. Yesterday, the UK government announced their first ever plan to tackle forever chemicals. They will assess the extent of forever chemicals in England's estuaries and coastal waters for the first time, in order to build a clearer picture of the risk these habitats face, and as an evidential basis for future regulatory action. The government also plans to reduce contamination through sewage sludge. We spoke to Francesca Ginley, Policy and Advocacy Manager at the Marine Conservation Society, about the impact that PFAS chemicals have on marine life within the UK. What impact have PFAS chemicals had on marine life within the UK?
Yeah, I mean, PFAS, they're such a big group of chemicals, and they've now been found in everything from plankton right up to polar bears. They're in all life, sort of, that people have studied. And the impacts are generally very chronic. So things like immune function have been shown to be impacted in sea otters and in dolphins. There's been hormonal impacts in seabirds, things like impacts on thyroid function and things like that. Neurological impacts on polar bears. And then, scarily, these chemicals have also been shown to pass from mother to young in quite a few species. So they can pass the placenta in mammals, and they've been shown to pass into seabird eggs as well. They really are affecting like the whole ecosystem and having these very chronic effects.
So then, considering that, how important is it that the government is setting out their plan of action on PFAS chemicals?
It's incredibly important, and it's, every day of delay that we have with any action on PFAS is more PFAS that are impacting the ocean and wider environment as well. So the plan is such a good step that the government have taken to acknowledge the harm that PFAS are causing and the threat that PFAS have to the future of the ocean and to environment and to us. And it sets out a sort of a good framework to then hopefully be built upon, because while we're really happy to see all the extra research and the monitoring and all the actions that are put in this plan, we want it to see it go further. We really need to see restrictions coming in. We need to see much, much broader PFAS restrictions, ideally a universal PFAS restriction, so they can't be used in products unless they are absolutely essential for the health and safety of society.
The government action plan therefore needs to go some way in limiting the impact of PFAS on marine life. But how effective will this action plan actually be? We spoke to Pippa Neal, an investigative journalist and the news editor at environmental publication The Ends Report. She has been following the fallout from PFAS for some time and has run several high-profile investigations looking into chemical contamination. To get a sense of the context behind this action plan, we asked her how effectively the government had historically acted on forever chemicals.
I mean, I don't think the government has been effective in dealing with PFAS pollution. And I say that because we know that there's, according to an Environment Agency report, there's as many as 10,000 PFAS polluted sites across the country. So that, illustrates just how widespread this pollution is and how many areas it impacts. So given that, I don't really think you can say there's been effective regulation. And, communities today are still finding out about the scale of the PFAS pollution in their local area. I did a story just yesterday or earlier this week about a woman living near a chemical factory in Lancashire who has had her duck's eggs tested for PFOA and has found extremely high levels of this chemical in the duck's eggs. And she's now, really worried about what this means for her health. She fed these eggs to her children and family and friends. So that's really alarming. And I don't think a pollution can be more serious than this, given the kind of potential impact of that on people's health. So yeah, I don't really think we can say that there's been effective regulation to date.
And in terms of the plan the government set out, how effective or adequate do you think it is?
I mean, I think it's really great that we have a plan. At Ends Report, we've been reporting on PFAS pollution for years. And when we first started reporting on it, it was very much like a fringe issue that was kind of mainly being discussed in the US and a bit in Europe, but really not in the UK. So I think even that is great progress that the government is taking action on PFAS and has made this plan. But I do think it kind of lacks any actual tangible action. It's sort of more of a plan to have a plan. So the plan commits to doing certain things, but it doesn't actually enact any immediate changes to policy. And it also kind of doesn't go as far as what's happening in the EU, where they're considering a blanket ban on PFAS chemicals. So, it's not going as far as what's happening there, which I think, many campaigners that I've spoken to say is a short-sighted element. That's an area where we're kind of falling behind what's being done in the EU. So it's great that we have this plan, but I think we still need much more action to keep up with what's happening in other countries in terms of regulating these chemicals.
Will these chemicals continue to build whilst this plan is being developed, or is this a case of just damage has been done and it's a cleanup effort?
Yeah, I think I spoke to a campaigner at ChemTrust when the plan was announced, and she used the phrase that the government needs to turn off the tap with PFAS and basically needs to stop it at its source. And the only way to do that is by kind of banning PFAS chemicals, because these are forever chemicals and many of them will bioaccumulate and build up in the food chain and in the environment. There's definitely valid reasons to kind of look at bans in that sense, because as you say, in the meantime, we're still emitting more PFAS to the environment and just like adding to this load of contamination.
And that's the real question here. While regulations are being written, these forever chemicals that we still have so much to learn about keep on accumulating. They will continue to affect our waterways, the marine life in it, and the health of the communities that live in the contamination zones. If you would like to learn more about the impact of forever chemicals on marine life and keep up to date with the government's action plan, subscribe to this podcast or head to the Oceanographic Newsroom. This has been the Ocean News Podcast. I've been Eva Cahill. Thank you for listening.